Hi, I'm Amanda Morgan from NotJustCute.com, and this is First Friday Q&A for the month of June. So welcome to summer for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere. Today's question comes from Bridget, and she writes in something I really related to. She mentioned that her 5-year-old daughter had just had her first dance recital. She writes, once we had dropped her off with her dance teacher before the recital, we went into the main lobby where they were selling bouquets of flowers. We thought she would just love it if we gave her a beautiful bouquet of flowers, and the glittery covered ones, no less, after her performance. We even bought a single rose for our 2-year-old son to give to her. Later, she says, after the show, I go to pick up my daughter from her teacher while my husband and son wait outside. As I'm walking in, we see each other, exchange big smiles. I have the flowers in my hand. As I approach her and start to hand her the flowers and tell her what a great job she did, she says, but I wanted a cookie. And she mentions to insert the fully whiny tone there. And she continued to repeat it over and over. Apparently in the lobby, they were also selling dance-themed decorated cookies. And some of the other children were getting those. Some of the children were getting flowers, and her daughter had decided she wanted the cookie. This continued on to 45 minutes of pouting. So she just says how much it put a damper on this really great evening that they had had, and how excited they were, and what a great job their daughter had done, and what a happy time they were having as a family. And then it all just implodes into this disappointment. She writes on later, we don't think we spoil either of our kids. We rarely buy toys or treats when we're out shopping. Why this greed? It's this nothing is good enough attitude. It's popped up before in some things, but never in such a heartbreaking way. I should add also the 2-year-old brother who had a single flower to give to her. She says she was still so upset that it wasn't a cookie that she just almost threw it on the ground, and it was just heartbreaking. This is a great question, and as I mentioned, it's something I really relate to. I've seen it just recently. This is birthday season in our house, and we had one day when it was a birthday, and someone was very disappointed in what was going on, and it all fell apart into a similar implosion. So I relate to this, Bridget, and I think a lot of people can. The first thing that I would point out before we get onto the topic, the broader topic that you mentioned, the need for gratitude and the social grace, the good manners of gratitude. The first thing I think I would talk about is, in a developmental sense, children who are really worked up. So in your daughter's case, it's a recital, so there's a lot of nervous energy and excitement and all of these things going on. The emotions kind of overtake our better thinking. And so sometimes you have children that fall apart because they've held it together for so long. I mean, think about a 5-year-old going through a dance recital. That's a lot to take on. That's a lot of emotion. That's a lot of pressure in some senses, or excitement or nervousness, whatever it's bringing on, can be a really highly charged emotional experience. And so when that's over, there's kind of this coming down period, which can sometimes cause this emotional collapse in a sense, because it's been built up so high, then it has to come back down. So that's the first thing I would look at there, is that in a developmental sense, in an emotional sense, it's a pretty, not an appropriate social response, but it's an appropriate emotional response. It's understandable is maybe a better way to put it than appropriate. In my son's case, it was birthday. He was really excited. It was really built up, and it didn't live up to those expectations, and he had all this other excitement going on, and so his response was bigger than it should have been. So it's kind of this pendulum swing type of thing. So if they're way over here in their emotions, whether it's excitement or nervousness or whatever it may be, then sometimes that pulls our emotions a little too far, kind of overcorrects, just kind of discombobulates our emotional regulation sometimes. I can relate to it personally as well. I know, and maybe other people can as well, that when we have a situation that brings us so far one way, we kind of respond in an overbalanced way. An example that I've read before is just the example of us becoming so happy that we cry. It's kind of a mixed emotion when you think of it that way. I know for me personally, when I've been, I tend to not get super angry. It's not really my common personality trait, we could say. But when I hurt myself pretty severely one time, that was kind of my default, was a very serious and kind of gruff response. I was in a car accident once, wasn't hurt in that situation, but it was a shock. I guess that's the better way. When I've been in situations that have put me into shock, I become really gruff and assertive and almost angry, which is not my normal personality. So I kind of look at it that way. Sometimes when children are put in an overly charged emotional experience, their response is unbalanced because it's almost like they're trying to regulate, and it discombobulates that emotional regulation. So that's just the first thing I would point out from a developmental standpoint, that as children are trying to regulate, they get in overcharged situations, their responses may not be appropriate because it's different from their normal regulation point. Now that said, again, doesn't mean that socially their response was appropriate. Obviously, it doesn't show the gratitude that you've engendered in your daughter. And from the other things that she mentioned in this email, I can tell that you're very conscientious and that you work on these types of things. So it's not, I would assume, not something that is engendered in your family's value system to be disrespectful or ungrateful. So I would think a lot of it is coming from that developmental emotional response. But as you asked, how do we engender gratitude in our children? I think that's a really important question, and it's something that's an ongoing process that we all need to be aware of and working on in our children. The first thing of interest that I have read recently points out that when we talk about gratitude in our children, we're actually talking about a two-part question, because we're not just talking about we may be talking about the behavior, the manners, the display that you wanted her to say thank you and smile and receive it appropriately. That's a behavior question. And so that's something that can be talked about and practiced as you would teach another behavior. That's the manners aspect. The other part of that is the worldview, the attitude, the interchange, the real feeling of gratitude. Some would call it the attitude of gratitude, really having it within them. And that's something that is more of a practice. It's something that we have to experience over and over to have that really rooted deeply within us, to be aware and to really feel grateful. So it's two parts. Do we feel grateful and do we act grateful? And to be quite honest, the behavior, the good manners, sometimes we need to show gratitude even though we don't feel gratitude. That sounds strange, but when we receive a gift, even when it's not something we want, we need to find something to be grateful for, even if it's just the gesture, and recognizing that. So that's kind of where the attitude and the behavior collide. So one thing that I would suggest, a friend actually taught to me years ago, it was a game that they play in their family to prepare their children to receive gifts well and to be able to show an appropriate response. They would, in their family, they would take turns at a gift bag or a box, and they would just go around the house and find something random to put in there and pretend to give it as a gift. And the receiver had to open it, find something about it to be grateful for, and appropriately thank the person. So some of them were easy. They'd find a favorite toy, but sometimes they said it would just be silly and they'd find something random like a sock and just put a sock in there, and the child had to look at it and think and either say, thank you for thinking of me, which is always a default answer, or to really think about how does this bless my life and say, thank you, this will keep my feet so warm, I appreciate that. Whatever it is, that's a great way to teach the perspective, looking for what's good in something, but also, and perhaps more importantly, the behavior. How do you accept a gift graciously? So that's one suggestion I would give. There's a few other tips I'll put down on the bottom, some other activities that I've read about recently that help teach our children gratitude or the behavior, the manners of receiving gifts graciously. If other people have some tips, they can put those below as well, or ways that they've practiced it. There's also a few articles down here about just teaching our children the perspective of being grateful and how we can engender that in our homes. And I'm really grateful to you, Bridget, for asking this question. As I was doing some of this reading on how we can teach our children, I noticed a lot of the posts come from November. That's a really common time that we read about teaching our children gratitude, right around Thanksgiving. But it's something we really have to practice all year long, especially if we really want to get it into the hearts of our little ones to really live gratefully. So thank you, Bridget, for asking this question, and thank you all of those who can add into the comments below ways that you engender gratitude in your children and how you teach the good manners of receiving gifts well. So I appreciate the question. Keep those coming in at questions@notjustcute.com. Add in your comments below and keep on reading here at Not Just Cute. Thanks so much. I'm Amanda Morgan from notjustcute.com.